Hi there, hello, my name's Lines, it's great to see you. Now today we're going to be doing shines and highlights. This can kind of be considered the other half of a pair with the shadow and shading video I'll link here. So what we're going to go over today is what highlights are, how to communicate how shiny something is, and then map even fairly detailed shines and reflections to complex shapes that can have flat and round sections. Then I'll do a demo of it in practice with a speed paint of a full professional grade illustration going all the way from sketch to line art, colors, shading, highlights, and having a finished image. Now, I'll also mention this image is for the winner of the server event we run over on our Discord server, and Calico Jinx has requested I do a rendition of her excellent character chilling on the porch, which was a lovely suggestion and a pleasure to do. Now, some of you may also be aware that the next tutorial was going to be a composition video. Well, turns out composition is big. It's a lot bigger than I thought, in fact. I'm still planning to make a really accessible beginner composition toolkit to help you understand a basic set of compositional elements and what each of them will do to your work, and then a simplified method of interrogating your work or concept to see which ones can help you achieve whatever your goals are. Maybe even a flowchart mouse mat with examples of each principle. And I want to say that making an image that demonstrates all of these principles that I want to include has been somewhat time consuming, so I do appreciate your patience. But we'll get to that when we get to that. Now, if you like what you see and want it to happen more often or more reliably, you can consider hitting like, subscribe, leave me a comment, let the algorithm know that you care, or becoming a member over on our Patreon. I'm also planning to open a fairly small number of new spots for the art classes that I run in the next few weeks, so come join the Discord if you're interested in getting updates about that when it becomes available. Now, as with any of the videos, there's going to be a homework sheet. So once you've had a go of that, if you choose to, you can pop that into the homework section in the Discord. I go over the homework sheets there and try to mark through them as often as I can. I'm a bit behind with them, but I'm definitely going to catch up, maybe. So, without any further ado, let's crack in. Alright, so to begin, what is shine? What is reflection? So we have two surfaces here, two subjects, and two viewers. Now with the bottom one, this one might be smooth, but individually the surface is very rough. So every bit of light that hits that surface is going to diffuse and be broken up and spread. Alternately, on a very flat glassy surface, you'll notice that it won't spread. The image will survive, it will be reflected because it won't be diffused by all the different directions of the surfaces it's hitting. So then, if we have two balls here, with one ball being smooth and having a bit of reflected light on it, but not an actual reflection, and we'll have a very smooth gradient on it. Now, on the one below it, we're going to have a very glassy surface. Same lighting, same things reflected, but these ones aren't being diffused. Their edges are sharp, their edges are crisp, and they remain crisp all the way to the edge, and that's going to be very important. And we'll just pop a little shadow on there to sort of show their lighting scenario. Alright, now, the other thing to remember is if we had these glassy sort of marbles here, and a whole bunch of them together, like a glass set of grapes, one thing you notice is they don't get darker. They're mirrors. You can't really shade a mirror. They'll just have the same image reflected in them on each individual one. That's because their surfaces are decided based on what direction they're facing. And that's an important distinction with shiny surfaces like that. Now, what if they're not spherical? So let's cut some of these and make them a little longer. One of them will make it longer on the x-axis, the other one will make it longer on the y-axis. And you'll notice that section in the middle, where they're stretched and extruded, the reflections stay the same, because the direction they're facing stays the same, so they don't have to move. Now, moving on then, what if we had a person in front of a wall? Well, one wall is a matte finish wall, and the other wall is going to be a mirror shine. So, this one here, the character casts a shadow, but the other one's a mirror, which means that you can't cast a shadow on a mirror. You'll just see a reflection of whatever's there, and in fact there'll probably be a bit of bounce light. Now speaking of the reflections, if we were to say be in a funhouse, and we've got a funhouse mirror in front of us that's shaped like a cylinder, and we're standing in front of a checkerboard wall, what we would see is firstly ourself and the top and bottom of the wall, and then we'd see the checkerboard pattern behind us. But as that checkerboard pattern behind us moves further towards the edges of that cylindrical mirror, it'll get narrower and narrower. The pattern will get narrower, and the detail will survive getting narrower, even though it gets exponentially smaller the closer it gets to that edge. And what then if it's a sphere? Well, the same thing will happen. Where we had it getting narrower and narrower just to the sides, now the same thing's going to happen top and bottom as well. You'll see yourself in the center, And then all the details, including your own body, will taper as they go down or up. But since it's a mirror, it won't diffuse. The detail won't be lost. And that's one of the key elements. Even if you have very sort of soft shapes like these, and you compress them towards the edge, you'll notice the contrast actually gets higher because they don't diffuse at all. They stay as more and more defined bands of light and dark. So now, if we have this shape here, a sphere, and we've got a cube and a sort of rectangular prism shape. Now a sphere will have the shine based on the direction it's facing, and all the surfaces of the sphere are facing different directions. What do you do if they're facing the same direction? So here, we've got the side of the cube, all of this surface is all facing the same way. And so what will happen is, one surface of what would be the sphere will be spread over that whole area, because a shine, or a glossy object, is defined based on the direction the surface is facing. So it's essentially like squashing the sphere into that shape. You'll have one bit that'll be spread out. The reverse is also going to be true though, on the corners. That entire curve has to be compressed into that little corner on the cube. Just like you'll compress the details around the edges of a sphere, if you have a sharp corner on a glossy object, those reflections will be compressed as well. And so now, let's project this dark surface onto that side of the cube there. And also, we'll project out those little bits of dark that are wrapping around the sphere as well, up and down from it. But we'll be very careful not to go all the way to the edge. And we'll do the same thing on the really large surface. And since it's got a really large surface pointing that direction, that whole section is going to be dark. And now, we'll do the shine. The shine's going to do a similar thing. The shine can either be smeared out along that surface, or alternately, you can narrow it into the corner there. And the shines will be compressed in to either along that edge there, or you can smear them out, and then we'll do the little highlight rim there on any surface that's facing off to the right, maybe a little down. But again, we'll make sure those bands of light and dark survive. And the really big takeaway is, if you have a really large flat plane on a reflective object, that large flat plane will have a large area of whatever you've used to map that section of your sphere. It'll get really big. The bottom right one there being a really important shape that we'll come back to later. So then, let's think of this sphere and break it up into some simple planes. So if we imagine a sphere made of simple squares, and with each of the squares being a flat plane that's facing out in a radial pattern from the center of the sphere, with the things on the top facing straight up, whereas the surfaces closer to the front facing towards the viewer. So let's map that out onto a very, very glossy shirt here. So we'll have our basic form, and now we'll think of those surfaces, and we'll try to map out which direction these surfaces are facing. For anything like shading or highlights, you need to think of your figure as a three-dimensional object in three-dimensional space, with surfaces that are facing different directions, etc. So, for instance, anything that's facing up and to the left will have that highlight on there. So let's break it down. We'll start with that highlight in the top left corner there, so any edge that's facing up and left can have that highlight on it. So things like the edge of the breasts, the shoulders, the arms, and then this lower fill here. So we'll fill in things like the underside of the breasts, the underside of the arms, anything that has volume, we'll fill in the underside with that underlight there. And we'll break it up where it have creases around the midsection there. Now we'll do that sort of paler section that sits behind the specular highlight as well. And that's going to be anything that's facing up. And now we add the specular highlights. So anything that's on that upper left corner, but it's facing a bit towards the viewer. And we'll add that as our shine. And that's how we'll get our consistent shine around the figure. Now, let's use this in context then. So I have three outfits here, each with different goals. The first one's going to be a bunny girl outfit. This one's great because it has both matte finish areas of the figure, so things like the skin, etc. And then you've got highly glossy areas like the leotard. And you've also then got semi-gloss areas like the stockings. After that, we're going to move on to a motorcycle riding outfit. So a full black leather outfit. The reason it's important that it's a black leather outfit is we can't shade a black outfit. It's got to be defined entirely by shine. Then we'll have a bit of a mixed outfit that's going to have a black shiny jacket and a black shiny skirt, And that's going to give us different kinds of materials, so not just flat, skin-tight rounded, but also things with big creases on them too. And that's what they're going to be for. Now, to do this, we're going to have to go over how to do our surface planes. So if you remember the shading tutorial, we talked about how to turn a rounded object into smooth, simple surface planes. These surface planes will help us map out where the shadows need to be by deciding whether that surface is facing towards or away from the light source. And simplifying those surfaces to simple shapes makes that process much, much easier. No matter what the shape is, break it up into simple surfaces, decide whether they're facing towards or away from the light source, and that's how we would map out shadows. That same technique is going to be used here. We'll start with simple, and then we'll add subtlety to it. So, if we were, for instance, to get those little spheres we've been using to define our shine, and break them up into simple surfaces, we'd be able to better then think about what direction they're facing. So instead of just, is it facing the light source or not, now we ask the question, which direction is it facing? And we can give it different colors based on which direction it's facing. So we'll go from red, purple, all the way around and think which way it's facing, with white in the middle being for surfaces that are facing the viewer. So what direction they are facing is what we want to color them based on. Now this is an exercise you have to do, this is just to help you conceptualize it. So we'll have our figure, we'll break it up into simple surface planes, just big simple polygons like an old PlayStation character, and then we'll start thinking about which direction these surfaces are facing. So let's start then with the purple color. So anything that's facing out to the left and down a bit, that one will be that sort of pinkish purple. And then anything that's facing down but left a bit, that would be that purple color. And we'll fill in any surfaces that are facing that direction. And things that are facing down a bit to the right, they're that blue color. And then things that are facing right, a little bit down, they can be that teal color. Things that are facing to the right and a little bit up, those will be green. And just try and look for surfaces you think would be facing the right direction to pick up that color. Next we have this sort of verdant green, or sort of greeny yellow. Anything that's facing up and a little to the right gets that. And let's move around to a sort of yellowy orange. So anything that's picking up that color is the surface that's facing up, but a bit to the left. And then lastly, we've got a red. So any surface that's facing off to the left, and maybe a little bit up, will pick up that red. If you imagine they're sort of surrounded by one of those LED strips of different lights, different surfaces will be lit by different colors based on which way they're facing. And then of course, any surfaces that are facing directly to the viewer, we can just leave them white. So that's a way of conceptualizing it in which direction it's facing. So let's apply some of that. Beginning then with this figure, we're going to have our shine map here, our shine ball here, so we can have a consistent thing to refer back to. We'll have a shaded area towards the bottom, and then an underlight where it's going to pick up some of the light of the environment. And then a specular highlight on top, and a bit of a rim shine on the bottom right. Beginning then, we'll just do the shading. Now remember, the shading and the shine are independent. The shading is the light that's hitting the surfaces, whereas the shine is a reflection of where the viewer is. You don't necessarily have to have the reflection in frame. The reflection is something that's out of shot. It's going to be what the character would see, not what the viewer would see. So we'll add some shine to some surfaces that have shine on them, like some hair, and we'll be consistent with our map of shine there. Because remember, you can have any shine you want. What matters most is that it's consistent. Now let's do the leotard. We've got the basic shine and shade on the figure. So we're going to think of this as rounded sections that are going to take on that rounded mapping of the sphere there. So for instance, the breasts will be basically like the rounded spheres. And then as we go down the body, we'll have the surfaces that are facing more down will pick up a darker color, and the surfaces around the sides towards the bottom will also pick up some shade. Once we've got those basic ones done, we'll detail out that shadow, add some to the seams. The seams are really important, the seams and creases. And you'll notice that it's not shaded directly at the bottom there, it's shaded on the bottom towards the right. That's because the figure isn't tilted down directly, it's tilted down and off to the right. That's an important distinction. Alright, and now let's fill in that lower reflected light. And you can see again, it's towards the bottom, but also towards the bottom off to the right, because the figure isn't just bent down directly towards us, they're bent down and also tilted over to the right as well. And now, adding the specular highlights. These are the white shines. Remember to break it up with the big creases on the fabric, and even split it down the middle where it goes across an area of seam where it divides in and has a crease in there. Those are really critical. Remember, the shine communicates best on the details and edges, not the big areas of shine. The blob itself doesn't matter. It's those details where it really matters. Beginning then on the motorcycle rider. We're going to have some shine all around the edge, and we're going to have a reflected light, really big from the bottom, and our specular highlights will be in that main little dot, as well as the top right and bottom left corner. That way we can have some differences in the shine around the edge, and it won't just all blend together. And we're going to be mindful that we're thinking of this as a 3-dimensional volume. This is a 3-dimensional shape. We're not just doing flat circles and sections, we're doing 3-dimensional volumes. The breasts are coming forward, the arms are cylinders, etc., etc. So we'll have those lower lit areas on the underside of the breast, and then we'll have a bit of that picked up shine around where the specular highlight's going to be. Now things like the neck, you'll notice if we were to turn that into a sort of pill shape, we wouldn't divide it with a straight line, we'd divide it with a curved line, because the neck is tilted back. As a cylinder, or the section of a pill, it's tilted back, which means it'll arc upwards, and so then you'd map an arcing upwards line across your sphere to get those shines. The same thing's going to be true for the sections of the arm. Find the angle that you would cut through that sphere to describe that. The other thing is thinking of things like the creases. Now, creases are essentially a cylindrical section. You're not expected to add all the detail from them, but at least show some shine there to show that in their round shape, they'll pick up some of it. And so now, let's start mapping it out. We've got the shines on the sides, with a big area in the center, and then whenever you have a crease inwards, you'll do essentially the reverse. You'll split it in half and do one side for the other, so you can have that inward face, so things like in the inner bits of seams. We'll add more of those shines around the sides of the arm there, and then we'll do the chest. Remembering there's that ridge of the rib cage, where just before it goes down to the abs, so it'll have a big shine there where it faces up. Then we've got that upward facing surface just below the navel. So you'll have that upper part of the sphere, so those shines will get bigger again. And also remembering the center line of the body kind of creases in a bit. So you'll have it on one side and the other as well. Now here, remembering those blue shapes we had. There was that big blue shape that has a big flat plane pointing down and to the right, just like this. Since we have a big flat plane pointing down and to the right, and reflections are based on the direction that it's facing, that will have a big shine there, because it's a big surface. Remember, shines and reflections are based on the direction the surface is facing. Moving on then down to the legs. We're going to have the rim shine around them, but we're going to keep in mind the legs aren't just cylinders or cones. They've got the sartorius there, that muscle that comes down, that's going to split that top surface and give it kind of 2 bulges. It's subtle, but it's really important. So we'll have the shine coming down the thigh, but we'll break it up where there's that little rounded edge where the sartorius comes up as well. And also remember, the shine's going to be different. The legs are tilted different directions. So you'll do a different division line around the sphere to decide what shine to show. So you'll see the shine is much longer on the leg on the right, because the leg on the right is tilted up more. Now, moving on to the actual shines. These are going to be pretty easy to map out, so any surface that's facing up to the right gets one, and that specular highlight for front-facing surfaces that have an up to the left. So in the middle of the bit we already mapped out, essentially. And some things are going to get narrow and some bits are going to get wider. You can see that little rim shine on the top right side of the breast on the left gets much bigger, because that rim is now stretched, because that surface is larger. Because it's about whether that surface, that simplified surface, and what direction it is facing. And so we'll add the rim shines there, or the shines to the front surfaces, and we'll also have those bits of crease there to really pick up those creases in the fabric, to really communicate those. And we'll break them up, remembering they're those sort of cylindrical folds. Moving on then, this one can look a little challenging, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So we'll start with standard light and shadow on things like the matte surfaces, that would be the skin and the clothing. We'll figure out what we want for our shine map. And now, let's start mapping it out. Now these sections here, they look kind of broken up and complicated, but they're not really. Broadly speaking, they're those same sort of pill shapes. So if you want to have a much easier way to approach it, do a big simple band of tone, then break it up as you go over the creases in the fabric, and then add some detail to it. And then of course, you can come back after the fact and add things like shine. So if you can conceptualize it and do it in the moment, that's great, but if you can't, it's really easy to scaffold yourself by doing big, simple bands and then cutting into those bands. So now let's do the same thing. So remembering things like the skirt is essentially a cylinder that's wrapped around the body, so it'll extend that shape out, but we'll also break up those shines where we'd have folds in the fabric. Now, let's get our white highlight. So that's going to be in the center of that main shine there, and we'll also have a bit of a picked up edge shine on his surface that's facing to the right or down and to the right. And that's them. We've got our different kinds of outfits with shiny sections and non-shiny sections, and we've mapped the shine out based on a consistent lighting map. Now that we've talked about highlights and lighting, before we move on to the Speedpaint demo, this is the perfect time to mention that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Now on the topic of lighting, interestingly, one of the things I fall back on often in my drawing is my experience with studio photography. Illustration is probably more like studio photography than anything else. You're building a scene, you're choosing and placing the subject, and choosing and placing lights of different types. One video series in particular that was really helpful for this was Product and Food Photography, Lighting, Gear, Styling, Editing and More by Tabitha Park. Skillshare offers a wide range of classes on topics like animation, design, entrepreneurship and more. And of course, there's a lot of really great classes on illustration, and the experts on the platform have created really great materials that can help with so many other areas, not just illustration. I especially love their curated learning paths, sequential class collections to help you master a specific skill. If you're always tired like me, having someone just arrange your learning pathway for you in a step-by-step manner is just invaluable. So, why wait? Join Skillshare today and unlock your creative potential. As a special offer to my viewers, the first 500 people to use the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So dive in, explore, and discover some truly useful content for creatives and professionals like us. Let's have a look at this then, in practice. So, we'll have our figure here. We'll get our very, very base forms out. I'm just going to expand the lower parts and make them bigger just to sort of force some of that perspective. And I'm only getting the vague, simple forms first. I won't be detailing anything until the base forms are right. If you start doing detail, you're sort of nailing it down, and then you can't really move anything around or work on it. Here's the sort of porch swing. The request was to do her on a porch swing. We don't really have porch swings here, so I apologize for the haunting image of the porch swing around there. Now with the base forms in, I can now do a second pass on my sketch, and this time I'll start adding the detail, now that I've got the forms in the right place. Remember, always go from simple to complex. Never start with the details. Start with the simple forms. Once they're good, then move on to your detail. So just doing a few details of the dress and the jacket there, and then the visible bit of thigh there, because the character's got a big sort of tattoo we'll get to in a sec. And then with the detail of the hand, and then mapping out the tattoo. And we've got the sort of sunflower pattern there. Now we've got the hair, and we can start inking it. Now you've probably seen a few of these where I'll just ink in very sort of simplistic line art first, and then I'll start adding some line weight variants in a later pass. If you're interested in following along on one of these that isn't sped up and isn't kind of rushed, I do have a series on 1-to-1 speed paintings where you can draw along. It's got instructions, there's no sped up, it's just a sort of Bob Ross style one. So if you're interested in that, there'll be a link on the screen there or in the description. Now I'm just going over and finishing off the inking there. That's looking pretty good. And just doing the inking for the things that are going to be in the foreground, so the character and the bench there. And now I'm just dropping in the flats on a separate layer and just getting the skin tones in and things like the eyes and ears, etc. This one I just used the bucket full for. This is not a terribly interesting step, I'll admit. And realizing I forgot the nails on the right-hand side there. And then throwing in the hair, adding that extra little sort of pale section like the, I think it was Rogue from the X-Men has one of them. And then we'll have the drink, and we'll sort of keep everything, if we can, in the same sort of analogous color palette, just so it gives a really good sort of relaxing vibe. If you have things from too many areas of the color palette, it can give a lot of dynamism, but it sort of takes away from that chill, relaxed vibe. So I wanted this one to have a sort of relaxed look to it. And so now I'm just doing the background in big sort of flats. So I've got like the veranda awning there, I've got the thing they're sitting on, I've got the cushion section. I'm just tuning the color in there, make it a bit of a cooler color. Adding a shading layer to the background. The reason I'm shading the background first is I like to get the volumes for the character first to know where I need to put detail in, and then I'll start doing the background, because there's no sense in detailing the bits of wood that are behind her. So I'll do the base fills for the character, then I'll do the background, and I'll finish that off. And then adding some cables here. The reference had like chains, but I don't want to draw chains, so I'm not going to. And just some simple starry backgrounds. and some sort of wood texture bits, just taking a bit out there. Again, very, very simple background. It's not going to be much of anything. Now with that, I'm going to start adding some thickness to the line art. So adding some darker spots to anywhere that would be ambient occluded, which means anywhere that the ambient light, that sort of ever-present soft light, would have trouble reaching. So things like creases, folds, anything that goes in. Now I can start doing the base shading. So this one, I'll have a layer just on top of my flats, set to multiply, working a sort of pale sort of purplish pink. And you'll notice one of the other things I'll do is I'll clone my flats layer, I'll darken it and hue shift it by about 20 down, and then I'll clip that to my shading layer, and that'll control the color and darkness of my shading. If you're interested in that, I've got a video on post-processing you can have a look at where I explain the process. It's a real time saver. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's come up with it, but it's very handy. Now here, I'm making my shine map for the dress. The dress is going to be really, like a really glossy, shiny cocktail dress. So I'll have my main highlight, some shade, and then a reflected light of the environment. Now the reflected light of the environment, I might have to do a bit of a sort of per location change. Like sometimes it'll pick up some of the woody color from the chair, sometimes it'll be whatever. So I'm going to keep that in mind when I'm mapping that out. So simple shading, any surfaces where I've got the lower side of a surface that's going to be shined, I'll do that darker, and I'll put some more detail on things like the clothing stretches and folds. And then remembering to do some on the drink as well. And then adding some to the jacket and the leggings. The leggings, I'll do them a bit darker just because I want them to sort of really sort of sit forward. And then I'll consider maybe also adding a rim shine to the top right, just because I'm concerned it may sort of, without it, she may blend in the background a bit. And so now I'm doing that lower sort of sub-shine for any surface that's facing down. It's going to pick up some sort of that reflected light from the environment, because you know there's the chair below her and everything else. And so now I'm just doing the detailing on the tattoo on the thigh there. So just throwing in some flats. I'm doing this on a separate layer. Both the inking and the coloring of the tattoo is on a separate layer, so I can lower the opacity just so it blends more in and doesn't look like actual flowers. And so now this is my extra shading layer, just for the really dark little bits when I want to have a bit of control, where I want a shadow that's really sort of pushed back. I can throw them down. And now adding that bright shine. So this is the bright white specular highlight. Remembering to break it up wherever there's things like creases in the fabric or anywhere there's some sort of compression. You really want to break it up because it should survive that, because on a glossy surface, as it bends, the reflection stays intact. And adding a bit of shine to the hair there as well. And now just softening the color of the line art. I'm adding a color hierarchy layer here. Again, this is part of that post-processing video, so if you're interested in these, that can be a really good time saver. And then looking at it, I really did turn up to sort of need that rim shine there. So I'm just putting in some solid white there, and on a separate layer, I'm going to go over with sort of a glossy sort of shine there to look like it's picking up some shine. And with that, we're finished. We've got the illustration done, and you can see how it implements those principles of having a map of where you want your shines to be, and then applying them consistently to the figure based on which direction the surface is facing. And as the surface faces a different direction, it picks up a different part of that reflection, of that shine map. If you want to have a go yourself, I've included a link to the homework sheet in the description, so have a go there. Come on over to the Discord, post it in there. I'd love to see it. I definitely go through them. I haven't had a chance to comment on them all, but they've looked amazing. And again, if you want to have a go at something that's a bit more sort of easy to follow along with, I've got some 1-to-1 speed draw-alongs that I do, where you can draw along in real time, and you can post those in there as well. I'd love to see them. And if you like what you see here, and you'd like to see more of it, or see it more consistently, consider becoming a member over on the Patreon. If you want to click the Skillshare link, that would be really helpful. Just have a look around, see if it's for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. You have a good day. Cheers. Bye.